Welcome to Joe's Learning Hub, a one-stop channel for teacher trainings. This video lecture is on National Policy of Education 1986, which is otherwise known as NPE 1986. At the end of this session, you will be able to understand the need for the NPE and state the recommendations given by NPE. To begin with, you should know that the National Policy of Education was set up after a 5-year review of National Policy of Education 1968. To help you understand better, let me tell you that the National Policy of Education was first started in 1968 to improve the educational scenario under the Prime Ministership of Indira Gandhi. There were reviews taking place for every 5 years on this National Policy of Education 1968 in order to bring in new policies and programs. As a result, the National Program of Education in the year 1986 was formed under the Prime Ministership of Rajiv Gandhi in order to democratize the already existing education system. To make it simple, National Policy of Education 1986 was framed to democratize education. Hope you have understood the reason behind the framing of National Policy of Education 1986. Now, even this National Policy of Education 1986 was reviewed by a committee called Acharya Ramamurthy Committee in 1990. Based on the recommendations from the report of Ramamurthy Committee, Program of Action 1992 was set up. As the NPE 1986 review report was submitted in 1992, this came to be known as Program of Action 1992 or POA 1992. You can learn about POA in another video lecture. Let's come back to National Policy of Education 1986. What was the necessity to frame National Policy of Education 1986? The needs were as follows: to develop quality education, to improve literacy rate, to implement free and compulsory education, to remove wastage and stagnation, to modernize curriculum and improve examination system. So these were the needs based on which National Policy of Education 1986 was framed. Now let's see what were the recommendations given by NPE 1986 to democratize education. The National Policy of Education 1986 submitted its recommendations as 12 parts in one volume. The 12 parts were Introductory Part, Essence and Role of Education, National System of Education, Education for Equality, Reorganization of Education at Different Stages, Technical and Management Education, Making the System Work, Reorienting the Content and Process of Education, the Teacher, the Management of Education, Resource and Review, and Future. You must know the recommendations given under each part. Let me explain it in detail for you. The first one is the introductory part. The policy talked about the significant contribution made by National Policy of Education 1968 to improve the educational scenario. In the second part of its recommendation on essence and role of education, National Policy of Education suggested the importance of education's role in an individual's life. In the third part, which is National System of Education, the policy insisted on the principles in which the National Policy of Education was conceived of. It also insisted to take measures in the direction of the common school system recommended by NPE 1968. It emphasized that the first 10 years in the 10 plus 2 plus 3 pattern will have 5 years of primary education and plus 2 as a part of school education. Earlier, plus 2 was not a part of school education. Hence, they recommended plus 2 to be a part of school education. The national system of education would be based on a national curricular framework with a common core subject with other flexible components. It also recommended the strengthening of UGC, AICTE, Indian Council of Agricultural Research, and Indian Medical Council to play an important role in giving shape to national system of education along with NCERT, NCTE, the National Institute of Educational Planning and Administration, and the National Institute of Adult Education. Now let's move on to the fourth part of the recommendation, which is education for equality. Here, the policy emphasized the removal of disparities and equalized educational opportunities. It recommended education for women's equality, education of SCs and STs, other educationally backward sections and areas like minorities, handicapped, and adult education. In the fifth part of its recommendation, that is reorganization of education at different stages, the policy recommended reorganization at 7 stages. Let's see one after the other. At early childhood care and education stage, it suggested to implement child-oriented approach, focus on play and individuality of a child instead of using formal methods and teaching 3 hours. It recommended reorganization at elementary education level. It recommended with child-centered approach, providing essential facilities in primary schools, giving non-formal education to school dropouts for children from habitations without schools, working children, and girls who cannot attend regular schools. And in secondary education, it recommended that children with special talent and aptitude should be provided opportunities to study at a faster pace. And with this recommendation, pace-setting residential schools, otherwise called as Navodaya Vidyalayas, were established. So, the pace-setting schools are those that serve the objectives of excellence along with equity and social justice to promote national integration by providing opportunities to talented children from different parts of the country to live and learn together, to develop their full potential, and most importantly, to become catalysts of a nationwide program of school environment. So, when you are asked to write about pace-setting schools, you can write this. So, pace-setting schools were formed based on the recommendation of National Policy of Education 1986. This is with regard to secondary education. Now, with regard to vocationalization, the policy recommended vocational education to be a distinct stream. The establishment of vocational courses or institutions will be the responsibility of the government as well as the employees in public and private sectors. Vocational graduates will be given opportunities under predetermined conditions for professional growth and development. So, this is with regard to vocationalization. For reorganization of higher education levels, the policy recommended urgent steps to be taken to protect the system from degradation. It emphasized linguistic competence. Introduction of audiovisual aids and electronic equipment happened due to National Policy of Education 1986. It recommended high quality in research work. With regard to open university and distant learning, it recommended the initiation of the open learning system to suit the diverse requirements of the citizens. Moving on to the next important recommendation under reorganization of education, the policy brought in delinking degrees from jobs, which meant that degrees need not be a necessary qualification for those jobs where a candidate, despite being well equipped for a job, is unable to get it because of unnecessary preference for graduate candidates. For this purpose, National Evaluation Organization was recommended to be established to conduct tests on a voluntary basis to determine the suitability of candidates for specific jobs. But this delinking degrees from jobs cannot be applied to occupation-specific courses like engineering, medicine, law, teaching, etc. and also for the specialists in the field of humanities, social sciences, etc. The policy recommended new pattern of the rural university on the lines of Mahatma Gandhi's revolutionary ideas on education. So this is with regard to rural university. Remember, if you are asked about delinking degrees from jobs, you can write the recommendation given by National Policy of Education 1986. Let me tell you that the reorganization of education at different stages included early childhood care and education, elementary education, secondary education, vocationalization, higher education level, delinking degree with jobs, and rural university reorganization, which are in total 7 stages. Now let's move on to the sixth part of the recommendation, which is technical and management education. The policy recommended developing and strengthening the technical manpower information system. They also recommended computers to be used in professional education, computer literacy to be started at school stage itself. Technical and management education programs will be on a flexible modular pattern based on credits. It also recommended self-employment as career option. The policy suggested ways to promote efficiency and effectiveness at all levels and the decentralizing of AICTE. So this is the recommendation regarding technical and management education. Now let's move on to the next part, making the system work. Here the policy recommended incorporation of quality and discipline into the system to make the system work. Now let's move on to the next part on reorienting the content and process of education. It recommended the reorientation of cultural perspective, values, languages, libraries, media and educational technology, work experience, education and environment, population education, mathematics teaching, science education, sports and physical examination, yoga, role of youth, and the evaluation process and examination reform. Introduction of continuous and comprehensive evaluation, that is CCE, in both scholastic and non-scholastic aspects of education. Seminar system in a phased manner from secondary stage. Grades instead of marks were all introduced for reorienting the process of education. Formation of a national examination reform framework was introduced to serve as a set of guidelines to the examining bodies. So these are the recommendations put forth by the National Policy of Education with regard to reorienting the content and the process of education. Next, regarding the teacher, the policy recommended formulation of guidelines to posting and transfer of teachers. For promotion, it recommended open, participative, and data-based evaluation for the teachers. For teacher education, the policy recommended establishment of diets, that is District Institutes of Education and Training, to organize pre-service and in-service training for elementary school teachers and personnel working in non-formal and adult education. It also recommended upgradation of selected teacher training colleges to complement the work of SCERT. Creation of networking arrangements between institutions of teacher education and University Department of Education was recommended. The next part is the management of education. It recommended high priority at national, state, district, and local level, and also voluntary agencies and institutions to work in liaison for the system of planning and the management of education. Now, in the 11th part, that is in resources and review, it recommended mobilizing donations in order to get funds for education. It also suggested review of National Policy of Education 1986 for every 5 years. I hope you remember that National Policy of Education itself was based upon the recommendation and review of National Policy of Education 1968. So, even for this National Policy of Education 1986, it recommended a review for every 5 years. Based on this review, we have the Program of Action 1992. And in the last part of the National Policy of Education recommendation, which is the future, it felt that the main task was to strengthen the base of the pyramid and to ensure that those at the top of the pyramid are the best in the world. So, my dear students, I have given a simple and a clear explanation of National Policy of Education 1986. Remember the recommendations like delinking degrees from jobs, pace-setting schools, continuous comprehensive evaluation, establishments of diets were the outcome of National Policy of Education 1986. Meet you with yet another topic. Until then, take care.